Hey everyone, I'm Landan with LMR.com. In this video, we're going to be explaining the installation steps for our 5.0 Resto digital instrument clusters. Now, if you want to know more specifics about the instrument clusters, be sure and check out the review video. In that video, I talk a little bit more about the features and characteristics of the clusters themselves and go over everything that you're going to get in the box. Going into this install, I would recommend above average mechanical and electrical skills, a really good assortment of tools and miscellaneous installation supplies, which you're going to see me use in the video. You'll also need to supply your own wire, butt connectors, or soldering equipment. A wire of choice and what's recommended by Dakota Digital is going to be 18 gauge. So because of our vast library of Fox Mustang how-to videos, we already have a video explaining how to remove the instrument cluster and the cluster surround from an 87 to 93 Mustang. So make sure you check out that video before you get started. Now, just to go ahead and clear the air here, guys, the install is going to take several hours to complete. Most of it's pretty redundant, so once you get going, you'll probably be able to fast track it the rest of the way. Y'all know me well enough by now. Work clean, work smart, and take your time. Enough of me yapping, let's get rolling. Like any install that involves electrical connections, go ahead and disconnect the negative battery cable. If needed, go ahead and support the vehicle via a lift or jack stands. For additional working space, loosen and remove the bolt that secures the battery, ground, and starter harness support bracket. Disconnect the electrical connection from the oil pressure sender. This sensor will differ for 87 to 89 cars. Our 93 needed a 1 1/16 socket to remove it. You can also use a crow's foot or an adjustable wrench. Remove the oil pressure sender from the engine block. Back on the workbench, lay out all the adapter bushings and then locate the correct oil pressure adapter bushing for your application. Cover the threads on the provided oil pressure sensor with high temperature thread sealant with PTFE. Thread it into the correct adapter by hand. Rotate the sensor a few more turns. You will need 2 tools for this. Apply some high temperature thread sealant with PTFE to the threads on the adapter bushing. Clean the port on the engine block or extension. Thread the adapter with the sensor into the block or extension by hand. Rotate the bushing a few more turns to snug it down. Locate the speed sensor on the driver's side of the transmission. Loosen and remove the 11mm retaining bolt. Carefully wiggle the sensor to remove it from the transmission. Disconnect the electrical connection. Pull back on the hairpin clip and then remove the sensor from the end of the cable. Set the sensor aside as we will need to inspect the gear and clean it before reassembling. Dislodge the sheathing from the body clip located on the floor pan. You don't have to fully remove the sensor if you know the gear is still good and it's not all oily and greasy. Loosen and remove the small 3/8 screw securing the Speedo cable clip to the frame rail. Bring the Speedo cable up from the bottom of the car. Some transmission fluid may run out of the end, so be mindful of that. Pull the cable out from the firewall. Whenever the end bottoms out on the inside, give it a slight jolt to dislodge the grommet. Now you can fully remove the Speedo cable from the car. Thoroughly clean the speed sensor with electric parts cleaner and inspect the gear for damage. If needed, use a soft brass brush to clean built-up debris. Lubricate the O-ring inside of the sensor with some dielectric grease and then install the provided plug. Don't forget to clean the hold-down bracket. You can also use this opportunity to purchase a new speed sensor. Before reinstalling the sensor, clean the opening on the side of the transmission. Slide the hold-down bracket into the grooves on the sensor and reinstall it back into the transmission. Rotate it back and forth to ensure proper tooth engagement. Reinstall and retighten the retaining bolt. Go ahead and clean up the connector. Go ahead and reconnect the electrical connection. Remove the electrical connector from the coolant temperature sender located at the front of the lower intake manifold. Don't get this confused with the air temperature sensor. Loosen and remove the factory sensor with an 11/16 socket and long extension. If needed, disconnect the TFI module connection and position the harness out of your way. Do your best to clean the port in the lower intake. Locate the correct bushing for your application and the provided coolant sensor. Apply high temp thread sealer with PTFE to the threads on the sensor. Install the sensor into the adapter and hand tighten. Hold the sensor with a wrench and turn the adapter a few turns until it becomes tight. Align the flats on both the sensor and bushing, as this will help out whenever you install it into the intake manifold. Go ahead and apply some high temperature thread sealer with PTFE to the threads on the adapter bushing. Thread the adapter and sensor into the intake manifold and finger tighten. Use a long extension and 1/2 inch drive 3/4 deep socket to tighten the adapter. The two factory connections can carefully be tucked out of the way, or you can cut the ends off and cover them with heat shrink. Either or, just make sure they're tucked out of the way. Locate the provided oil pressure and coolant temperature electrical connections that came in your kit. Both of these cables have different connections, so you can't install them on the wrong sensor. Protect the oil pressure cable with some convoluted tubing. Route this cable in the same manner as the factory connection. Connect the coolant temperature cable and mark the tubing wherever the cable will install. Remove both cables and then install the coolant temperature cable into the convoluted tubing and wrap the marked area with electrical tape. Wrap the tubing in electrical tape in segmented lengths to keep the cables from coming out of the tubing. From inside of the car, feed something long and flexible through the opening in the firewall. Route the cables and tubing underneath the upper intake. Tape the cables to the end of the tool. Carefully pull the cables inside of the car. Be mindful of sharp areas underneath the dash and at the opening in the firewall. Once the cables are pulled through, cut the convoluted tubing to length if applicable. Tuck the tubing alongside the fuel injector harness. Go ahead and connect the cables to the two sensors. Cut a slit in the grommet to remove it from the Speedo cable or replace it with a new one from our site. Whatever route you take, it's easier to install the grommet with a slit cut into it. Position the grommet over the tubing and then install it into the firewall. Remove the wires from the fishing tool. Now we need to begin locating all of the wires that we are going to splice into so that the gauge cluster can properly function. We will make splices at the left-hand and right-hand instrument cluster electrical connections, as well as the VSS or vehicle speed sensor feed wire at the PCM. The car we are working on is a 1993 Fox Body. These wire colors will differ throughout the 1987 to 1993 year range, so be sure and reference the product pages for the proper wiring diagrams for these connections. Starting with the left-hand cluster connection, make note of the pin locations and wire colors. The first wire will be the left turn signal indicator. It's the light green wire with white tracer. There will be two wires occupying this location. Pick either one of the wires. Next is the high beam indicator. It's the gray wire with white tracer. Located at pin 4 is the 12-volt Keon power input, and the wire color is red with a yellow tracer. Next is the check engine light. This wire is located at pin 9 and is pink with a light green tracer. Pin 11 is next. This is the tachometer feed. It's a tan wire with yellow tracer. The last splice on the left-hand connector is located at pin 13. This is the illumination feed, which will activate the dimming feature in the cluster. It's a light blue wire with red tracer. Moving to the right-hand electrical connector now. We will make a total of 4 splices on this connector. The first splice is at pin 10. This is for the fuel gauge. It's a yellow wire with white tracer. Next is the right turn signal indicator. This is located at pin 12. It's a white wire with light blue tracer. There will be 2 wires occupying this location. Pick either one of the wires. The last splice on the right-hand connector is in between pin 2 and pin 14. Pin 2 is the ignition switch circuit, and pin 14 is the battery indicator feed. Included with the cluster is an alternator load harness. This harness will be wired in between these wires to ensure that the alternator charges the battery. The final splice you will need to make is located at the PCM, which is behind the passenger side kick panel. The wire that needs to be spliced is located at pin 3 and is the VSS or Vehicle Speed Sensor feed wire. This is a gray wire with black tracer. Just a reminder, the wire colors that were mentioned are applicable for a 1993 5-liter Mustang. Be sure and reference the product pages to see the proper wiring diagrams for the other year ranges. Now we need to get our 18 gauge wire ready. I'm using a few different colors in cutting each piece of wire so that they are all 6 feet in length. Take one of the wires that you just cut and strip one of the ends. Cut a piece of heat shrink. If needed, carefully pull the left-hand instrument cluster connector towards you to expose more of the harness. If it's needed, cut away any existing harness or electrical tape. You'll want to splice the loose wire into the factory harness on the left-hand connector. Cut the factory wire for the left turn signal indicator. This cut needs to be about 3 to 4 inches from the connector. Strip both ends from the factory wire and then twist each end. Install the correct size non-insulated butt connector onto one of the wires and crimp. Slide on the piece of heat shrink. Twist the loose wire and the other end of the factory wire together. Slide the 2 wires into the butt connector and crimp. Position the heat shrink into place and then apply heat to seal. You can now repeat these same steps for all of the wires that need to be spliced on the left-hand connector. As you splice each wire, you'll find it helpful if you label each wire. This can be done by using an inexpensive label maker or with some tape and a marker. Repeat these same steps for the fuel gauge and right turn signal indicator wires on the right-hand connector. Go ahead and cut and strip the 2 wires that are for the ignition switch and battery indicator feed. The resistor orientation does not matter. Cut and strip both ends of the resistor. Pick one of the cut wires and twist one end of the resistor with either end of the cut wire. Install a butt connector and crimp. Slide on a piece of heat shrink and then slide the other end of the wire into the butt connector and crimp. Position the heat shrink into place and apply heat to seal. Repeat these same steps for the other wire and the other end of the resistor. Before continuing, I took the opportunity to route the left-hand connector and the wires behind the dash. The last wire that needs to be spliced is at the PCM. To gain access, you will need to remove the passenger side kick panel. With the kick panel removed, disconnect any electrical connector that's in the way. If it's still in place, loosen the hold-down bolt for the PCM cradle. Ours was missing. Bring the PCM down and then fully loosen the 10mm connector hold-down bolt. Disconnect the connector from the PCM and then remove the plastic cover. If needed, carefully cut away the existing harness or electrical tape. Once there is enough working room for the harness, locate the VSS feed wire on the connector. Cut this wire and then repeat the splicing procedure just like you have done for the other wires. Whenever this is complete, neatly retape the harness. Reinstall the plastic onto the connector and plug it back into the PCM. Retighten the hold-down bolt and reposition the PCM. Be sure and reconnect any electrical connection that was previously disconnected. Don't reinstall the kick panel just yet. Leave it off until everything is finalized. I chose this option because I knew exactly where the VSS feed wire was on a 1993 car. Option 2, and probably the easiest option for all of you, is going to be where the VSS feed wire is located behind the driver's side kick panel. This wire is dark green with a white tracer and can be found on one of the black connectors. Of course, you can also confirm this wire by looking at the wires on the speed sensor itself. There are 2 more loose wires that need to be built. One is a ground wire and the other is a constant 12-volt wire for the control box. I chose a black wire for the ground and a red wire for the 12-volt constant. Both wires were cut to 6 feet. I installed a female spade terminal onto the red wire with heat shrink and a ring terminal on the black wire with heat shrink. The constant 12-volt wire can be wired into the fuse box. A popular constant 12-volt power source in the fuse box is the fuse for the cigarette lighter. Locate and remove this fuse. Install the fuse tap onto the 12-volt side of the fuse, and then reinstall the fuse. You can verify the powered side by using a multimeter. Go ahead and connect the red wire to the fuse tap. The ground wire can be grounded to an existing ground, or you can create a new location. Whichever route you take, verify that the surface is clean of surface rust, debris, or paint. So the location for our control box is going to be behind the radio. This requires the removal of the center console. It's very easy to do, and you can watch our video on how to do this if you need help. With everything now out of the way, I begin to route all the wires in the direction of where the box will sit. Once all the wires are in the general vicinity, you want to go ahead and test everything before finalizing the install. Go ahead and strip all the wires and install them into their designated terminal on the control box. All of this is easily understood by reading the instruction manual. Connect the provided networking cable to any port on the control box and then to the back of the cluster. Reconnect the negative battery cable and then start the car. Of course, make sure you're in a well-ventilated area before doing this. At this point, the only gauges that won't be active or that won't be functioning will be the speedometer and the fuel gauge. The speedometer will have to be calibrated, and you will need to select the correct fuel sender type for your car. Depending on the year of your car, the sending units in the fuel tank had different ohm readings. All of the indicators should work except for the cruise control indicator. Once everything is verified, you can shut the car off and disconnect the negative battery cable. We're now ready for final assembly. Remove all the wires from the control box. Group the wires together based on whichever side of the control box they will be connected to. You'll want to cut one wire at a time and then connect it to the control box. Doing it this way will prevent you from installing the wire into the wrong terminal. Cut the wire to length and then strip it. Twist the strands together and then install it into the correct terminal. Fully tighten the set screw. Do this for all of the wires. I intentionally left the wires a little long so that if the box ever needs to be serviced, I can do so with adequate working room instead of them being cut too short and you're servicing it underneath the dash. Neatly route the wires and secure them out of the way with zip ties. Carefully position the control box into place. Route the networking cable behind the dash and up to the opening where the new cluster will be installed. Position the new cluster into place and connect the networking cable. Align the mounting tabs and retighten the factory retaining screws. For now, reinstall the front seat if you removed it and retighten the retaining hardware. Go ahead and reconnect the battery. Before we reinstall any interior panels, we need to select the proper fuel sender, calibrate the speedometer, and program the miles. Before turning the key to the on position, press and hold the switch 1 on the selector switch, then turn the key to the on position, but don't start the car. Press and release switch 1 until setup fuel is displayed. Press and hold switch 1 until fuel sender is displayed. The default reading will be whatever is preset from the factory. Press and release switch 1 until the correct sender for your application is displayed. Refer to your instruction manual to reference the two sender types for 87 to 93 Mustangs. Whenever the proper sender is displayed, press and hold switch 1 until done is displayed. You can now press and release switch 1 until fuel done is displayed. Press and hold switch 1 to return to the main setup menu. If desired, you can now turn the key off and all changes will be saved. Next, you will need to calibrate the speedometer if you are not using a Dakota digital GPS sender. To do this, simply download a free GPS app onto your smartphone that has the capability to measure the distance driven, or use a second vehicle and go measure 1 mile. We're going to tap into our shop resources and use our dyno to drive 1 mile. Drive the car to the area where you marked 1 mile. Shut the car off and then hold switch 1 while starting the car. Set speed is the first option displayed on the LCD. Press and hold switch 1 to enter the speed submenu. Press and release switch 1 until auto is displayed. Whenever you're ready, press and hold switch 1 until the LCD says SPD pulses 0. Begin driving the measured mile in a normal driving manner. Once you reach the end of the measured mile, or you're passing the marker, press and release switch 1. The speedometer will now be displaying your current speed and you're finished with speedometer calibration. The last thing to calibrate is the odometer. You have the capability to match your odometer one time within the first 100 miles of the cluster recording the distance driven. Prior warning before setting the odometer: do not use tenths. If it's less than 0.5, round down. If it's 0.5 or greater, round up. Press and hold switch 1 while turning the key to the on position. Press and release switch 1 until set ODOM is displayed. Press and hold switch 1 until set ODOMI is displayed. Press and release switch 1 to increment the digit. Press and hold switch 1 to advance until the rightmost digit has been set. Press and hold switch 1 and the display will show the miles that were inputted with MI save ? And then followed by no. Release the switch. If the value is incorrect, press and hold switch 1 while no is displayed to go back and change the odometer, or turn the key off to cancel the changes. If the value is correct, press and release switch 1 so that it now says yes. Press and hold switch 1 to save the current odometer reading. You can now thoroughly vacuum the carpet, wipe down any area that needs to be cleaned, and then reassemble your interior. Now, you can go enjoy your 5.0 Resto digital instrument cluster. Well, that completes the installation steps for our 5.0 Resto digital instrument cluster. As always, for the most current product information, pricing, and availability on anything you saw in the video, reference lmr.com. If you like this video or it helped you out, hit that thumbs up button. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for more Fox Body content and turn on notifications. That way you're notified every time we release something new. Until next time, you guys know what to do by now. For all things Fox Body Mustang, keep it right here with the real enthusiasts, lmr.com.